Well, my name is Ramonepreston. I'm the pastor of Next Level Church and the president and CEO of Ramonepreston Enterprises, both of which pretty much encompass all of what I do in both the ministry and the marketplace. I live in the beautiful Buckhead community of Atlanta, along with my wife of 16 years, Deon Preston, who is my best friend, the love of my life. I'm also the father of two amazing children who are actually adults now. My firstborn, Ramonepreston, she's 21 years old. She blessed me with my first grandchild, Papa's baby, Taylin, and my son, Ramonepreston Jr., who's 19 years old, my namesake, who works very closely with me. And amongst all the things that I have accomplished, at least with the current version of who I am today, I'm most humbled and proud to be, of course, saved and a servant of God, to be a husband to my wife, a father and grandfather to my children and to my grandchild, and as well as a pastor and spiritual father to the members of my church and to all of my spiritual sons and daughters. But as amazing as this current version of who Ramonepreston is today, whether it's in ministry or marketplace, that's not how the story of my life began, or that's not the journey that I've had personally to get to where I am, although the current version of who I am may be very commendable. I was born and raised in South Florida. Of course, I'm a 70s baby, and both of my parents were addicted to crack cocaine. My grandmother, my mom's mom, made the decision to raise me as well as my two siblings, which, by the way, my grandmother is a German Jewish white woman. I'm biracial, and she made the decision to take a biracial child from her crack addict daughter, who was dating another crack addict who happened to be a pimp, a player who ran the streets and who pretty much used her as one of his tools. But I'm so thankful for my grandmother, Joanne Clancy, who made the decision to raise this young biracial child in a predominantly black neighborhood, or what we may call today as the hood, and to rear me and to teach me and to train me all the essential things that I needed, especially being raised in the 70s, biracial, in a predominantly black neighborhood. So just the beginning of this story in and of itself speaks to the dysfunction that I was going to be dealing with being raised as a young biracial child. I honestly don't have a lot of fond memories as a child. Again, you know, my grandmother, she's a white German Jewish woman in a predominantly black neighborhood, the hood. We're talking about late 70s, early 80s. The crack epidemic is at its highest. And so everything that we're experiencing as kids in this small black neighborhood is centered around crack, is centered around drugs, is centered around crime. And it's not really a whole lot of things in this small town in South Florida that we're looking up to. So as far back as I can remember, I don't even know if there was an actual time in my childhood that I really understood what was going on in life. I mean, I'm being picked at by black kids because they say I need to go on the other side of the track with the white people. I'm being picked at by the white people because they say I need to stay on this side of the track with the black people. I can't even tell you how many times I went home crying to my grandma about who people say my daddy was, because back then we all thought we were all cousins. We didn't know who our daddies was. We didn't know what life was really about. And you're talking about a 50, 60 something year old German Jewish white woman. She's doing her best to try to help raise and rear this biracial black boy in this world to understand life from his perspective, but she can only see it from her perspective. So I have to honestly say, all the way up until the time I was maybe 8 or 9, I don't even recall having a clear understanding of life. All I can recall is that I was just confused. I really didn't understand the details of life. I didn't know if I was coming or going. I just had no place. I had no identity. And I can remember probably around 8 or 9 was the first time I started drinking, or at least experimenting with alcohol, whether it was just somebody leaving their beer on the side of the house or just finding something walking through the path. A friend of mine and myself, we were experimenting with smoking cigarette butts. I mean, it was just what you did in a cracked out neighborhood like what we lived in. And so by the age of 12, I mean, I was a full-fledged alcoholic. I'm talking about 12 years old. I was a full-fledged alcoholic. I wasn't experimenting with alcohol. I was actually a 12-year-old alcoholic. But again, by that time, I've lived 12 years of dysfunction, of confusion, of uncertainty, of just not even knowing who I was and what life was all about. And I found, like my parents and everybody else around me, a gateway to relieve myself of some of the 12-year-old stress that I was experiencing. So by 12 years old, I was a full-fledged alcoholic. I was smoking cigarettes, at least on a regular basis. I was experimenting with marijuana, experimenting with cocaine powder, and just about doing everything that everybody else in this cracked out neighborhood was doing. And we're talking about 12 years old. I was in the 6th grade, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, smoking weed, and just experimenting at that time. So once I started experimenting with alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, it was pretty much a 3-4 year period from 8 to about 12 that something just clicked in me. And I'm sure anybody that's been in the streets, anybody that's been addicted to anything, understand exactly what I'm saying when I say something just clicked in me. And I'm talking about 8, 9, 10, 11, going into 12 years old. That was a very sensitive, but it was a very critical moment for me, because it should have been the time that I was preparing for middle school. It should have been the time that I was making a decision on what sports I was going to play or what I wanted to be when I grew up. But having lived the first 8 or 9 years of my life, literally watching both of my parents smoke crack, watching both of my parents live their lives as basers or junkies in the community, watching my daddy, who was a pimp, use my mama and at times cry and yell and just beg my daddy to stop beating my mama, and to watch him for years just beat her down, abuse her, and her just basically do the same to him and to us. My only outlet, at least I thought at the time, was to drink more alcohol, smoke more cigarettes, smoke more weed, which by the age of 12, it automatically led me to experimenting with cocaine powder. The moment I started snorting cocaine powder, my whole life at that time took a turn. So by the time I hit 12 years old, we're talking about a 12-year-old kid in 6th grade, my grandmother, she didn't even know this, but I literally, for at least almost a half of my 6th grade school year, quit school. Every day I get up and get dressed and leave the house, and she thinking I'm going to school, and I'm literally going around the corner in the bushes, a 12-year-old kid with a few pieces of rock, trying to sell rock, because I'm going to be a dope dealer. I'm going to be a South Florida, Hope Sound, Hood, Nino Brown. I'm drinking, I'm smoking cigarettes, I'm smoking weed. And somebody may say, well, how's you even getting all this stuff at 12 years old? Well, the local crackheads, you get them a piece of rock, they're going to go get whatever you want. So I am 12 years old, and I am suffocating all of my dysfunction, all of my confusion, all of my uncertainties, all of the things that I'm dealing with because of my lack of identity. I'm suffocating it with drinking alcohol, with smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, and now at 12 years old, I'm experimenting with cocaine powder. And that's when my entire life literally took a turn for the worst. So from 12 to 16 years old, I'm still experimenting with alcohol, with smoking cigarettes, with marijuana, with cocaine powder, and now I've added to my hood portfolio selling dope, being a little hustler on the side, all of which my grandma probably had an idea that I was doing, but again, it's really nothing that she could do. She might yell, she might scream, stay in the house. I just sneak out the back door. And from 12 to 16 years old, my life was pretty much consumed with that. Both my parents knew exactly what I was doing. As a matter of fact, my mom and dad were actually, I know this sounds so bizarre, but my biological parents were my first customers as a dope dealer. I would literally credit, that is advance, my mom and my daddy dope all month long until she got our welfare check, because I justified it as a way of making sure that some of the money that my grandma should have been getting to take care of me and my sisters was coming back to the house. So from 12 to 16, I sold dope to my parents on a regular basis. I ran the streets. I was in and out of school, didn't want to go to school, didn't want to do nothing but be a dope boy, be a hustler, and get high. And so by the time I turned 16 years old, I caught my first dope charge. Me and a few friends, we got caught in another town, snorting coke in the car. Police came up on us, snuck up on us, and we went to jail. But because I was a juvenile, I was able to take the charges so that they didn't have to do any time. But it subsequently led me to go to what they called back then a boys' home. It was a youth program. It was centered around trying to treat teenagers who had drug problems, who had anger problems, who had behavior problems, but it didn't do no good. The only thing good that came out of this experience of getting arrested for drugs and subsequently being court ordered to go to this boys' home, the only thing good came out of it was a few months into me being in the program, my mom and my daddy called me and told me that my grandmother, the woman who raised me, had cancer, and the doctors only gave her a few weeks to live. And so somehow my mom and dad, they talked to the courts, the probation officers, they talked to somebody, and they figured out a way to get me out a little bit early so that I could spend the final weeks with my grandmother, who at the time was mama to all of us. You know, my mom, even though she was my mama, but she was basically like the big sister of the house. We all treated her like she was just a big aggravating, a disobedient sister. So my grandmother was my mama. And so miraculously, I was released from the boys' home, was able to come home and spend the final few weeks of my grandmother's life with her while she was on her deathbed.